This morning I am in New York talking with Stephen A. Lastres, who is the Global Director of Knowledge Management for the firm of Du Bois and Plimpton, LLP. I want to thank you, Steve, for coming into the office today. For our viewers, this happens to be President's Day, which is a national holiday in our country, and one of the few days that you are, in theory, not required to be here at the office during the week. Did make the traffic probably a little lighter coming in from where I'm staying out in New Jersey, but the trains were fewer and farther between, too. I noticed that you have been here with the firms in about 10, 11 years. You came in May of 2005. We're speaking now in 2016. Sort of with that, by way of formal introduction, could we sort of paint a picture of you as a regular human, since we all are,
Sure.
More or less that. Could you tell us a little bit about
Sure.
your life, not only now, but perhaps even when you were young?
Sure. So I'm a product of immigrant parents from Spain. I'm first generation, first to go to college, on to graduate school and law school. And I grew up on the Lower East Side of Manhattan here in New York. So very much in a Spanish culture, and grew up in Manhattan and went on to elementary school and then high school here in the city, as well as college, and then finally, broadened out into graduate school in Brooklyn, and then law school here back in Manhattan. I'm married for almost 30 years. Have two grown daughters, and I've worked in law firms in the law library community my whole entire career.
Well, that sounds rather interesting. You're sort of a New Yorker these days, I guess.
Sure.
I understand you live way out in, Queens?
Yeah, that's one of the boroughs.
The other side of one of the rivers.
Absolutely. So it's more of a residential community, but certainly within the city limits.
Sort of as a follow-up question to that, do you have any particular hobbies or passions of various sorts that occupy time?
Actually, I love travel. My wife and I travel extensively when we can, and more recently, in the last 5 years, I've gotten involved in marathons and Ironman triathlon competitions. So kind of midlife, decided to embark upon, adventures that I didn't have time for when I was married, young with children, and so now I've done at least 8 marathons, 2 Ironman competitions, and so I do a lot of weekend outings to practice those sports.
You sort of have to keep trained, I guess.
Oh yeah,
in practice, as you say. Yeah,
absolutely.
No,
It takes dedication. I think it really helps with. Actually, it really helps with. Working in a very complex and global environment of a law firm where you're running 24/7, and so it's kind of the same environment. The intensity of that training outside the office is very similar. So I find it very interesting the similarities in terms of what's required to keep up those interests.
Good. Well, sort of, you've alluded to the fact that you have college and you've gone on to school in various places around town, shall we say? Could we be a little more specific about
Sure.
your 3 degrees?
Sure. So I
where you did get them?
Sure. So I got my first undergraduate degree at Pace University here in Manhattan campus. It was a bachelor's in business administration and international management. Then I went on to Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, where I got my master's in library science degree, and then New York Law School, where I got my JD.
No. So you are sort of a local boy in that sense,
Yes.
I guess. Now, after you completed your various degrees, I guess, your first law library job, at least, was with a law firm. You were assistant librarian at Rubenbaum, Levin, Constant, and Friedman, which was actually over 30 years ago. You've already mentioned you've been around about that long. Could you tell us a little bit about not only that job, but perhaps how you were attracted into the law library field.
Yeah, so actually that was my first formal job in the profession, but my first job was actually, I went to a Jesuit high school here in Manhattan called Xavier High School.
Okay.
And they had a part-time work assignments that you could get, and at the time I was looking for ways to fund my weekend activities, going to movies and doing different things, and having.
Yes, I hear you. That's important.
Absolutely. So they actually had suggested I go interview at a firm that was called Gollenbach and Burrell, which was in the Olympic Towers on Fifth Avenue, and I did. And it was supposed to be shelving books and doing clerical aspects within the law library. But what I wound up doing there as a part-time employee, in the afternoons after school, after high school, was actually doing, at those times, and I'm dating myself now, but we had the old deluxe Lexus terminals with the
I
foil
remember those
paper.
great big things.
The great huge machines that were the size of a desk.
Oh, they were on the desk, as I remember.
It was on a desk, huge, and then what happened was you used to have to hit the print button once the screen filled up at the time with all of the text, and you had to hit the print button. And the foil paper would start scrolling until it finished, and then the next screen of a case, for example, you'd have to wait again until that filled up and press the button. And the law librarian at the time wasn't kind of used to this new technology and kind of thought it rather boring. And so, quite frankly, that's how I got involved in getting, actually printing out the first, cases that were available digitally at the time, and sending them on to the partners and other associates at the firm. And that's how I kind of got the love of the profession, in that, there wasn't the internet out there yet. There weren't people who had PCs in their homes or anything else, and this was the first technology that I had exposure to, and it piqued my interest right from the very beginning, and that's how I started thinking about becoming a law librarian.
That's right. In those days, the Lexus and then Westlaw's that came along connected by telephone lines.
It did.
The old-fashioned copper
Yeah,
kind.
there was actually a phone that sat
Yeah,
onto
you
the
had
actual desk.
Acoustic
Yeah.
coupler, I think
Yeah.
they call that, and you had to put the receiver into it from the phone, and then it would communicate with your computer.
Yeah.
And it was a 300 baud, which
300
was,
baud modem.
Yes, and that's why the page would slowly fill the screen from the
Correct.
top to the bottom, and printing was also,
Mhm.
as you said,
Mhm.
an adventure.
It was, and it took, it took quite a bit, especially if you had a Supreme Court case, and it was very lengthy. It took quite a, long time. So
Yeah.
you could be literally sitting at that machine for hours to get, the case law that you needed.
Yeah.
And obviously, for obvious reasons, most people preferred the print at that time.
Well, of course. Now, it's interesting, you mentioned it would take a while to load a Supreme Court opinion, but you could do that. And prior to the computer, I was out on the West Coast. And in order to get an opinion of the United States Supreme Court, the text, in those days, we relied on a paper service that came by airmail, which was a special premium postage in those days,
Right.
but would come in about 2 days from Washington, D.C., that would have the full opinion. So the faculty in the law school where I was on staff would want to hear about a case through the news, and they'd want to read it, and they'd have to wait for about 2 days to get it, because that was the fastest we could, unless the New York Times thought it significant enough to actually print it
Print
in
it
their
out.
newspaper, because there was a West Coast edition of that. And that didn't happen very often. So the online was like magic.
It was at that time,
Yeah.
as ancient as it seems today.
Mm-hmm. No, it was quite a change. But you're right, it's a bit faster now, should we say, put it at that. So you actually started off as a student in the firm, and then you became a shall we say, a degreed or proper law librarian.
Right.
Do you want to talk about that change?
Sure. So it was actually a law firm that was in the same building, the Olympic Towers on Fifth Avenue, and so I used to go and borrow books from Rubenbaum Levin when I was at Goldenbaum Burrell. So I knew the librarian at that time. So after getting my degree, there was an opening for an assistant librarian, and I took that position. And what was interesting then is we still today, in 2016 talk about the stereotypical librarian who is kind of shy and kind of not may not be as socially sophisticated as a lot of the young librarians who are coming out today. And I worked for someone like that, and so it was a great opportunity because I was very social, very outspoken, had no problems communicating with the lawyers, and again, because of the technology, I was able to reach out to young lawyers. And at the time, we were just embarking upon the internet. So I was using that technology to bring people into the library who were fascinated with the internet. So with some of the the senior partners, I would use sports and being able to download sports results and metrics from the internet at that time. And so it really enabled me to bring the lawyers to better understand the technology, to eliminate some of the barriers of adoption to technology back probably 25 years ago, in a way that the librarian who was already pretty senior at the time, who kind of sat in her office and waited until the phone rang, because at those times the phone had to ring or someone walked into the library.
What it was like a lot.
You didn't receive the request through email like you do today, and so her kind of role was primarily, in her mind, was to work on those requests as they were received, instead of trying to think about what today is common practice, which is that we go out and we try to market our services to the lawyers. So that was kind of my first foray into thinking about customer service, thinking about how do we expand the role of the law librarian. What can we be doing to be marketing our services to the lawyers we serve?
Well, you moved in about 85 then on to Fulbright and Jaworski, and then later Arnold and Porter, two other prominent firms, and sort of expanded your role as a librarian into handling legal records and continuing legal education, that sort of thing. Could you talk a little bit about sort of that era in your career?
So what was interesting, and I want to give full credit, Sophie Fabian, who was the librarian at the time at what was then known as Revis McGrath.
Okay.
And the executive director was Hildebrandt, who he was the executive director and then went on his own. And Hildebrandt was a prominent consulting firm within the law firm and legal community for decades, which has now been acquired by Thomson. But Sophie Fabian, unbeknownst to me at the time, unfortunately, she was diagnosed with cancer, and so when I got hired as the assistant librarian at Revis McGrath, she was really hiring me to find a replacement because she had, terminal cancer. So it was after the fact, and within 6 months of being hired, that she unfortunately passed away, and I assumed position as the director of Revis McGrath, and within 2 years, I managed and led the firm, the library anyway, through a merger with Fulbright and Jaworski. Revis McGrath was a prominent firm here in New York that had significant transactional experience, and we had a New York and Los Angeles presence. So Fulbright at the time was still primarily a Texas-based firm, and not a global. Now it's Norton Fulbright, which is a global firm with that merged with Norton Rose in the UK. So at that time, they were primarily a Texas firm with several offices within Texas, and they wanted to expand their scope in the United States, and so they merged with Revis McGrath, and they acquired a New York and Los Angeles presence as a result. And in that environment, I did a library move at the time within the New York office, and exposed the lawyers to technology again that was still not the norm in Texas, for sure. I think there was a little bit more of sophistication, I will say, in New York in terms of the tools that we used at the time within the law library community. And so I was asked at the time by the New York partners to help lead and integrate the libraries, because there was, with that merger, we had probably about I would say 7 or 8 libraries within the various offices, and within the Houston office, they were still, and they had about 13 satellite libraries.
The older model.
The older model.
Yeah.
And
very
so they
much.
wanted to understand how to better organize now, now that we were essentially a national law firm.
I remember going into law firms, even in D.C., and they were on multiple floors of buildings, and there would be little practice libraries,
Sure.
often positioned near the tax people
Mhm.
and some of the others.
Yep.
That had a lot of need for access to paper materials in
absolutely.
those days. So when you say that multiple libraries in the same place, that's sort of
That was
the
very
model
common
I'm
at the
thinking.
time. Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. But I think what we learned from that obviously is that the ability to service those lawyers
Mhm.
and be able to find materials as they were taken from office to office was an obstacle to better service. And what we found is obviously by integrating the collection into one space and having all of the resources available in one place, it was one-stop shop.
Yeah.
And so we actually were able to better support them. And I think that they, quite frankly, also this was probably, again, we're talking many, many years ago, was the first opportunity to how do we organize librarian professionals throughout the country. I mean, today that is the norm in very large firms like Debevoise or many other of the MLA 100. But there wasn't a model at that time. How do we organize? We're still primarily doing things by phone. Internet had just started up and email. But if you're in Texas or you're in LA, 3 hours behind, how do we organize that? How do we leverage your talents after New York has gone to sleep? All of those things were brand new. They weren't commonplace like they are today.
Yeah. The time difference does create its own differences in
Sure.
things. I have a daughter who lives in the Eastern time zone, and I live in the Pacific zone. And even figuring out if we make a voice telephone call, what time is it there? And, so.
Well, and it's interesting you say that because here, even for training purposes, we have offices in Asia, and so 10 p.m. here
Even a
on
greater
Eastern
difference.
is 9 a.m. in the morning their time. So even in terms of the work hours that we have to work as law librarians has dramatically changed because I think many in the profession came in thinking that they wanted a rewarding career where they could work 9 to 5 and make a difference, but certainly manageable hours, and those days are certainly well gone. And most private law librarians work the hours. I wouldn't say necessarily the hours that some of our first and second years work, which are sometimes 24/7, but certainly most of the librarians here at Debevoise work on average 9 hours a day. We have weekend staffing on Sundays. And so the what is expected in terms of the model has dramatically changed.
So much for the old 35-hour work week.
Those days are gone, absolutely.
That's interesting. Now, as you came up, and we'll talk a little bit about your current position in a moment, but you moved pretty rapidly, I think, for a young guy.
Sure.
And we were both young once. Did you have anybody that you would count as a mentor or a guide?
Sure. So at Arnold and Porter, I would say is where I really found my first true mentor. James Shular, who is I think on the cusp of retirement now.
He is.
He's been at the firm I think a minimum 45 years. When I worked at Arnold and Porter, I worked in the New York office, and Arnold and Porter is still today a primarily DC headquartered office law firm.
Jim is, I know.
And Jim has been, I think he's moved, I know that I've helped him move the library at least twice in D.C., and they've just recently moved now closer to the convention center in Washington, D.C.
Right.
But one of the things I was able to do from New York is we started our own local area network at the time. We were the first group within the law firm that had a local area network, and we were computerized. We were second to the accounting department, the finance department at the firm. So Jim was instrumental in enabling me to take off with the technology, with delivering, connecting all of the libraries because Arnold and Porter is also about 700-800 lawyers, and we had a national presence, and enabling me to move forward and to take on technology as part of my my responsibilities, and not feeling in any way threatened by my role here in New York. And so it really worked out really well for me, and he mentored me. And so he was a great mentor in terms of not only allowing me to do things on the technology side, but also that political guidance that takes experience to earn, and telling me, Steve, you may want to rethink how to position this, especially in law firms, very conservative environment.
Yeah,
so you don't
better have him suggest you rather
Absolutely.
than the powers that be.
Absolutely, and supporting ideas that I had. It's great when you walk into a managing partner at a firm and you've got someone who they trust and has been, leading the department for many years to say, I think this is a great idea. We should move forward, or I support, what Steve is doing. So he is definitely someone that within my career I would definitely see is a significant impact on my career and just the law librarians, because the number of law librarians that have been through the Arnold and Porter environment, he has mentored all of them. He's a great person, and special shout out to him. And now that he's just about embarking on his own retirement.
We have a retired list for retired law librarians, and hopefully we'll be able to entice him to join
Great.
it. It's not particularly active, but we do discuss some of the changes that
Sure.
we perceive happening in our field and what kind of work we do, and, which is sort of a segue in a way into asking you a little bit about your job here. You've been here now, 10, 11 years.
Yeah, almost 11 years.
But it's been 10 or 11 years when all this technology that we've just been talking about has moved beyond that level to a whole new world.
So the precursor, let me just back up a little bit. The precursor was that I was at Arnold & Porter. Not only did I leverage technology and really got heavily involved in technology, but then I also got involved in records management. The firm had a very traditional records management program that was paper-based, and here in New York, at least, many of the major firms were making transitions into digital records management and bringing in software to help manage email and electronic records. And so because I had gotten involved in that area, and I was actually very involved in ARMA, which is the Association of Records Managers Association, I managed 5 of the Northeast chapters from Boston all the way down to New Jersey. And I was able to leverage that knowledge at the firm to help the firm introduce AccuTrack, which was his first software product to manage records. And so I was heavily involved in that area and started getting involved in what today is known as knowledge management. But back then, 20 years ago, it was not well known or well regarded in the law firm industry. Certainly knowledge management as a discipline has been around for longer. So I got involved in that area, and even in terms of continuing legal education. In New York, they had passed a requirement for mandatory continuing legal education, and there wasn't anyone in the New York office at the time who had the knowledge about, okay, how do we track the amount of credits that a lawyer has to have to continue to be certified within the New York bar. And so I use technology for that as well. And so that grounding of extending the use of technology to solve problems in law firms that the law firms needed, especially Arnold & Porter, was what got me to the point where I decided, okay, I need to think about what my profession, in terms of my profession, how do I expand my profession? And that's when I decided to go to law school, because the partners at Arnold & Porter would tell me, and this was typical at the time, they were very, very sensitive to not knowing technology. And when I would tell them, you really need to adopt this new technology, it will make you an efficient lawyer and help you to provide better client services. The response I would get from some of the ornery partners was, please don't tell me how to practice. You didn't go to law school, you don't know.
So
And
you decided you would at least become a colleague of sorts.
absolutely. So that's when I went to law school, and I was already about 36 years old. So I wasn't young in the profession. I was young, but not
the
as young
typical
as
25-year-old.
correct.
Yeah.
And I already had a wife and kids, but I decided to go to law school because I didn't want the partners telling me that I didn't understand what it was to practice, and so I went to law school, passed the New York and New Jersey bars. And while I never formally practiced, I did a bunch of internships while I was in law school and worked 7 days a week because I was still working full-time at Arnold and Porter. And as a result of getting my law degree, immediately, even before I got the actual degree, I was already having partners have me visit with clients about CD-ROMs. If you remember the era of CD-ROMs, and we had a CD-ROM tower within the law firm, and we managed we had all the national reporters on CDs, and you needed to know how to mount and dismount the discs from the tower. And so we had actual clients in Canada who were thinking about getting involved in the CD-ROM industry. And I remember vividly John Willett, who was one of the partners at Arnold and Porter here in New York, in particular, who invited me to meet with the general counsel of one of our clients to talk about the CD-ROM technology and the impact that it was going to have. And so the respect that I gained from the partnership, just by being in law school, not even having graduated, made a tremendous difference. And as a result of going to law school, graduating, it set me up for the next phase, which was Debevoise and Plimpton, where at the time what they were looking for is, okay, we now have counsel who have practiced at the firm most of their careers, and we're asking them how to better organize work product and precedents and forms, but they don't have the background of how to organize information. That's what you learn in library school.
Yes.
And so they were looking to see how we can take that knowledge management piece about the internal know-how of the firm, and how do we marry that with the information that the library provides, which is primarily looking at external content and researching that external content, so that we could essentially, the firm was viewing that as two sides of a coin, whether it's internal know-how or external know-how. How do we integrate that into one department so that when we need information, we can go to one place and get that information? And that's kind of how I stepped into the firm here at Debevoise, is they were looking for that type of person, and they wanted someone who had a JD. They wanted someone who had experience with technology, which I had gotten at Arnold and Porter. And so I came in to physically integrate two disparate departments, the knowledge management department at the time and the library, into one cohesive group. And I came in, did that with a staff of about 20 people today. And today we are at the point where we are, while we still have a small physical library, we are at the point where we are now managing a global digital infrastructure for the firm. We have 8 offices, 6 of those international, and we're able to provide all of the services and resources that the lawyers need digitally in a way that I would say that many firms haven't yet quite achieved. There are a number of peer firms. One of them that I know you've interviewed recently, which is Jean O'Grady at DLA Piper.
Yes.
She's one of them, but there's I would say a handful of us who have achieved this level of digital integration of our services, and I think part of that is to see our role expanding, where we're information stewards of the firm's information, and not just a administrative department within the organization. And I think that's the role that, as you and I were talking earlier, that's the role that I think we need to evolve into, is to become information stewards for the organization, not just for the library.
Well, this sort of is part of the focus that I wanted to talk about with you today, because you've already sort of introduced how a change kind of hit you in your career. You came in with a library degree. For many years, a lot of our firm colleagues said that that was the credential that the firms wanted to hire. Many of them were concerned if someone also had a law degree, that what was that person's expectation of the job. Would it be more to do what they as lawyers did on an everyday basis, and less of what the librarian would be. But you came in through this era when the firms started to look at the needs, and in order to have the credibility to give them this, help them address this question, you found it, shall we say, helpful, if not essential, to become a pure lawyer and degreed lawyer, as well as a librarian. Now, as the field is changing, the older traditional librarians, such as the one you've worked for many years ago, who sat and waited for questions to be brought to her, and then would scurry around and get the books and whatever and give them to them, whoever needed it. That's gone. It's a new world.
It's a new world, and I think that the reality is that there are still some of our colleagues that are living in that world, and as we said, they're just ducking for cover until they can get to retirement. But I think the reality is we need to embrace the future. We need to jump into it and recognize that what we need to be is an integral part of providing legal services. And the way we do that in a private law firm is we've changed the model. We have embedded librarians who are embedded into every single practice area. They become the experts because, as you and I were talking earlier, Google has become the generalist law librarian. Yeah. Google is where most of our young associates go to find basic factual information. The day where we had law librarian generalists, and we did have them here 11 years ago, they're gone. What we have today, what we've replaced it is with librarians who are specialists, and we don't call them here in our firm librarians anymore. We lost that title about 3 years ago. They're all known as research analysts. And just as a sidebar, the reason we did that wasn't because we were just interested in changing names. It was because I started looking at the fact that our law librarians weren't paid what I thought was commensurate with their graduate degrees, and yet we had folks in the marketing department that were called marketing analysts who only had college degrees. They didn't have advanced graduate degrees, who were making more. And I started looking into why that was. And what I found out from our partners is our corporate clients understand that analysts are people who, just don't fetch books. They're people who have to synthesize, and they have to, kind of look through the information and do some analysis with that information. And that's when I decided, my law librarians had far more talent and skills than these, college graduates who were coming into the firm while they decided whether law school was the right future for them, and that we needed to make a change, and we did. And so the department, my title actually is Director of Knowledge Management Services. So there is no library now, because as we know, in most private law firms, the library as a space is going the way of the dinosaur, and the library as a service is what has evolved. And so we provide a service, not necessarily a space, even though we still do have a physical space, as you know. But that reality has required us to think differently about, okay, how do we integrate into a firm where we were considered an admin department, where we had our physical space and people would come visit us. That doesn't happen anymore. Yeah. We have some summer associates, some first-year associates, when they first get here, want to get to know us. They come to visit us as professionals. They're not coming to visit the library to use the books
not here
in the
visiting
library.
Books.
Correct.
Yeah,
and
which you don't really have.
Which
too
we
many.
don't have too many. We just have some archival materials and some additional treatises for those lawyers who themselves are probably very senior, and they grew up with the books and they still feel comfortable with that technology. But I will say that even lawyers in their 50 plus are adapting to technology, and we're doing that because we have changed the way we approach technology. We're doing concierge service, which means that we have our librarians go up to the partner's office, and in their own environment of their office where they feel comfortable and they're not in a classroom setting, we show them how to use a new app that we call Deb Mobile, for example, where they are able to access all of their research resources on their mobile tablet or smartphone device. And so the ability for them to feel comfortable in their environment, that there's no one around to know that they don't know, enables them to want to learn the technology because they see it being used at other firms. They see it being used with the younger lawyers, and so they want to keep up. Lawyers typically are a very competitive group, and
I've noticed
you've
over
noticed
the years.
So we use that psyche that they bring to the table, right? The very adversarial. We use it in a way to teach them the technology in a way that's disarming.
Uh-huh.
And that's what we've done here at the firm, and we now have partners reaching out to our embedded librarians, or analysts as we call them, in a way that we only saw when they needed research. Now they're reaching out to them for business and competitive intelligence information. We have 19 curated electronic newsletters that go out every single day, where the librarian is the person who is synthesizing all of the news from all the major legal publishers and the business papers like the Wall Street Journal, and they're deciding what are the articles that are relevant to my practice, and they're putting that out there in the morning, and it's digital. So you get a headline, you have a little abstract, and if it's of interest, you click on the link, it takes you out to the original source. We use an aggregator tool to do this. And you're now seeing partners who say, thanks to that article that I read in that whatever curated newsletter, we actually got more business.